You are being recorded. So
Cool. I'm going to give you guys
So
a card
whenever
just so
you're
you
ready.
have that.
Thank you.
And first off, I really want to thank you guys for having me here and letting me talk to you guys. I know this is not something that you have to do, and so I appreciate you guys' hospitality. I will say that I've heard nothing but positive things about you guys as a group, so appreciate the work that you guys do.
Thank you.
A lot of times, I know from experience that sometimes these jobs are not appreciated. You know, people don't usually just give you a call and tell you, hey, you're doing a great job. Just want to let you know that. Usually they're calling to tell you about some perceived bad job that you're doing or complaining to you about something. So I know at County Commission you probably get a lot of complaints about roads, and bridges, and things like that. So I appreciate what you guys do. I always kind of like to frame things about me a little bit, so I'll give you just a brief introduction of me. I didn't actually grow up in Texas. I grew up in Oklahoma, and actually grew up in the middle of an oil field. My father, blue-collar mechanic, and for extra money he would go out and work on the pump jacks on the weekends. And so literally from the time I could walk, I was on an oil well pad site. And so this wasn't something that I was unaccustomed to whenever we moved to Texas. And it wasn't something that bothered me whenever I knew there was oil and gas activity going on when I moved there. And so we moved to Dish. At the time it was Clark, Texas. We changed our name, of course, for the publicity, Dish Network. So everybody got free Dish Network, which just expired last year. So Dish was located just outside of kind of the urban sprawl, kind of a rural bedroom community. Most people had at least an acre of land up to, you know, large parcels, 50 or 60, 100 acres of land. So since we were just outside of the urban sprawl, we became kind of the center point, or the Grand Central Station, if you will, for all of the pipelines that come to transport the natural gas out of the Barnett Shale. So we had about a dozen pipelines that kind of converged on Dish. And so there's infrastructure for these pipelines, the compressors, the dehydration units, the processing equipment, the odorization, and then of course we had the wells as well. So we pretty much had every aspect of oil and gas development that happened right inside of our borders. And you know, some of this was inside of our borders, some of this was just outside of our borders. We were a very small community. So that kind of gives you a little bit of perspective on Dish and how that, you know, where we were and how we ended up in the situation that we were in. And so, like most people, we moved out there because we wanted to raise our family in the country. We had some acreage, we had some horses, that sort of stuff. And I think that there's an aspect of this that you have to look at from two different sides, and that's the property rights aspect of this. I have property rights and you have property rights. So your property rights end where mine begin. And so you don't just by virtue of you having property rights get to destroy mine in the process of getting yours. So there has to be some sort of balance there. I don't think anybody, for the most part, the average person in America, don't care what people do on their property as long as it isn't bothering them. Now, there's some people who disagree with that, but I think for the most part, that's kind of the personality of America. You do what you want to do, just don't bother me when you're doing it. And that's the way that I was with this. Unfortunately, in our situation, their odors, their dust, their lights, their noises, all of those things, that wasn't staying on their side of the fence. It was coming over to our side of the fence. And so we had to deal with people who went and spent their life savings on a piece of property that now we're kind of unable to peacefully enjoy it for what they purchased it for. I mean, you don't buy a piece of property in the country and then not be able to go outside because the odors are so bad that they make your eyes burn. That's not why you buy your property in the country. You buy your property in the country so you can go out and enjoy it. And so a guy named Walter Lippmann said private property was the original source of freedom. It's still its main bulwark. And I think that is still accurate today. It really is the source of freedom. That's what separates us from a lot of other countries, is that we're able to own and peacefully enjoy property. And so, I think part of our job as elected officials is to ensure that people get their private property rights, and that we're not making decisions that impact their private property rights or negatively impact their private property rights. And so I served 1 year as a town commissioner in Dish. I served 4 years as mayor, and I just recently, last year, was elected to the Aubrey City Council, the town that I transplanted to. And so I'm still an elected official. And so part of our job, again, is to ensure that people are able to own and peacefully enjoy property. And I know that you guys know this, but long after you leave office, the decisions that you make while you're here will have a lasting impact on this community. And the legacy that you leave behind, I know, is important. You wouldn't be doing this if you didn't want to do the right thing for the people that you represent. Whether we agree on everything or we disagree on everything, I'm almost certain that every elected official wants to leave a good legacy. So the decisions you make will either haunt you or they will be something that you will be honored for. And I've made those decisions myself. I've made decisions that I wish I hadn't made. I've made mistakes just like everybody else has. And you get to think about those things. There's lots of good things that I think I did. There's also some things that I would have done differently. And so that's why it's so important to be able to discuss these issues in open and transparent ways. And I know that probably in this case, I really believe you guys are interested in what I have to say, and I really appreciate that. That's not always the case, though. And I didn't come here to tell you what to do. I didn't come here to tell you what not to do. That's a decision that you're going to have to make on your own. So, some things that maybe you want to consider is I think that there is this mentality that gets pushed whenever this activity begins. It's like the gold rush mentality. Everybody's going to get rich. And this sort of overtakes things, and it prevents us from using our common sense. The stuff has been there for how many millions of years? It's going to be there next year and the year after that and the year after that. There's really no rush. So you can take time to think about this. You can take time to prepare for this. You can take time to decide whether this is the best thing for your community. It's the best thing for your community within these parameters. You have time to think about that. It ain't going anywhere. So you don't have to rush into this. What's that saying? Fools rush in. And that's played out over and over and over again. Another thing that is often brought up in areas where you don't have a mature oil and gas development going on is the amount of jobs and the impact on the economy that you have. I always ask this question, how many certified pipeline welders are in the room? And there's usually not that many. And so, especially in the times right now, most of your jobs are going to be temporary. The bulk of them will be temporary, and they'll be out-of-state workers. For the most part, they'll be from Texas. Maybe one of my neighbors will be up here doing work, or someone that I know will be up here working on the rigs, working on the pipelines, working on the variety of infrastructure, especially the skills that you need experience to do. Now, that's not to say that someone here couldn't get a job in the industry, but primarily those jobs are going to be the lower tier jobs. They're going to be the truck driving jobs. They're going to be the fence building jobs. They're going to be those sort of unskilled labor jobs. Not unless you have a large conglomerate of petroleum engineers, they're probably not going to get the higher paying jobs in the industry. That's just the reality of it. Particularly as county commissioners, I think the bulk of your job is probably dealing with roads. I mean, I would guess that that's a large portion of your budget, and I would guess that's a large portion of your time. At least that's the county commissioners in Texas. They spend a lot of time dealing with roads, especially if you have any sort of growth at all, and trying to manage that growth and without spending too much money, but spending enough money to keep traffic flowing. And so your county roads are not to the standard that's going to maintain the abuse that oil and gas equipment is going to give it. We had the same thing in Dish, in Denton County. You have your small chip seal or small thin layered asphalt roads that can maintain a pickup truck or a pickup truck and a loaded cattle, but they're not going to be able to maintain 200,000 pound pipeline equipment or a drilling rig or the type of equipment day in and day out. So the expenses of your roads impacts is going to be real. I tell this story, and I wish I would have brought pictures, but we had a chip seal. One of the roads was a chip seal road, and one of these big, huge pieces of pipeline cutting equipment came through, and it's one of these that's got this huge round arm that spins around to cut the pipeline trench. This thing was probably 15 feet high, and it literally left trenches. It cracked the pavement and left trenches in the road. And that was a county road too, so the county had to come back and put 8 inches of asphalt to have a road that would sustain the abuse that it was taking. I mean, I'm guessing that that's probably like your main highways have that sort of level of asphalt. So, and you guys know what that costs. I don't have to tell you what that costs. To put in a road like that is extremely expensive. And so, if you have the ability to enter into road use agreements with the industry, I would highly encourage you to consider that. Make them pay for the damage that they do. I don't think that's unreasonable to ask that. There's no reason why the citizens of Gem County need to be paying for the damage that they do. And so that was one of the biggest things that our county commissioner had in one of the biggest problems that they had in Texas was dealing with the roads and the destruction of the roads. Our county commissioner in the Dish actually went down to the legislature because the counties in Texas have very little input. They have no zoning authority. They don't have very much influence over oil and gas development. And so they went down there to simply try and get them to pay for the roads because it was such a big deal. And that's not being anti-oil and gas. That's being responsible. Nuisances, lights, noise, odor, that sort of stuff. I don't know if people call you guys directly to complain, but if they do, you're going to be getting a lot of phone calls. So if you're able to control that, I would encourage you to consider doing that. And I think for the most part, even counties in Texas have some ability to influence nuisance type stuff. So maybe that's something you guys could consider. I understand that you guys are on a huge baseline water testing project, which is a very, very good idea. And you've leveraged some resources from outside entities to do that. And I applaud you for that. I think that's a great idea. Air testing is also something that you might want to consider, do some baseline air testing. If you could afford it, you could even have some permanent monitors. Probably one of the greatest things that we got in Dish was a permanent air monitor, and it's published online. You can go look at it 24/7, and it just continuously takes air samples. And for many years, the industry would tell us that they weren't causing any problems, but when you have the telltale sign right there that says, yes, you are, it was almost an immediate, they started cleaning things up. They started putting in emission controls. They started controlling that odor that we'd been complaining about for years. So, and again, people want to frame this as you're being anti-oil and gas. And anytime that you bring up these things, this isn't anti-oil and gas. This is being reasonable. This is being responsible. And this is making this to be as much of a win-win situation as it can be. I mean, do you want to set up a win-lose situation where the industry wins and everybody else loses? No, you don't want to do that. So it's not anti-oil and gas to set up a win-win situation. So, we all took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. Any public official that's ever been elected in the United States takes that same oath or similar oath. Mine may have been a little different in Texas than yours was here, but it's very similar. And I know that we take those responsibilities very seriously. And the Constitution applies to everybody. And so, one of the primary functions of government, in my view, is that we're supposed to protect the constitutional rights of everybody. And so, again, I appreciate you guys having me here. I applaud you for all the work that you're doing. And if you guys would like to just have a discussion and answer any questions, maybe have a little bit of time to do that.
Great. Thank you, Kelvin. Commissioners, questions?
Yeah, I have quite a few, actually. So even on your, Kevin, as you went through this on your road mitigation, because you probably do have an ag base there also that's mixed in with the oil and gas industry. Mm-hmm. So with road mitigation and your farmers and the ag, did you ever have any conflict or problems there? How did you do that? Because the ag, they're running big heavy trucks, and the oil and gas, they say, well, it's not fair, you mitigate against us, but not them. You ever have those scenarios pop up?
They absolutely do say that. And I think that there's maybe some applicability in some instances. In Texas, the counties are not allowed to have road use agreements. So the cities are, though. So as a city of Dish, we required road use agreements. And when we did that, industry actually set everything up to where they had to use our roads very minimally. And so they will not want to pay that, and they will try and use excuses that they can. I would say that you've had agriculture here for how long? I'm guessing that most of your county roads have more than, this hadn't happened in just the last couple of years, that you have a large agriculture population. And so the hauling a load of cattle weighs how many pounds? 25,000 pounds. I don't know what that number is. Your tanker trucks are 80,000 pounds. And beyond the pickup trucks, the water trucks are probably the lightest vehicle that you will see. And so the impact that you have from agriculture is not going to be the impact that you see from oil and gas development. And I can provide you with what we used, and it basically takes an example of what the road is like now before you start any activity. It's being used by your ag, it's being used by everything else, and you play a pro rata share of this moving forward. So they don't completely pay for the repaving of the roads, they just pay their pro rata damage that they do. So I'm assuming you have a county engineer, county road and bridge department. They can probably assist you in coming up with what that pro rata share is. So they're not repaving your roads, they're paying their pro rata share to repave your roads.
If you could send that to us, almost our link and stuff, can you get us that?
Yeah.
We'd like to look at
Yeah.
how you work that and do.
It's definitely gonna get hammered with that kind of use. But at the same time, one thing they're gonna bring up, I know, Bill, is gonna be the
Thank you.
the ag is changing also. It's like instead of going from some little smaller trucks hauling beets, this year almost everybody contracted with a larger outfit to haul beets. Those are 80,000 pound trucks and they fill them to the max, if not over. There's hundreds of them a day going down the road. I mean, so they're gonna bring that type of stuff up. It's gonna be a fight. I agree that we have to try to protect that, but I don't think it's gonna be quite as simple as the city, like you're saying, because they have no other choice but to go on the county roads.
Right, right. And one thing you might think about, you might consider, is not to have this applicable to oil and gas only, but more to heavy vehicles. If they're over a certain weight, like most of our bridges and stuff like that, and especially in the county, are 25 tons. So that's 50,000 pounds. So you may be able, there may be some alternative solutions that can help you, dealing with this.
And I was just gonna comment that the state's underway to approve the 129,000 pound trucking, which is
Yeah.
on the state highways, but they also run through the counties as well. But,
It'll be a fight.
one of the things that I wanted to ask you, we talked a lot about roads and such and property rights. Any real health problems that you noticed that somehow was tied to the industry? I know there's a lot of nuisance items that you mentioned. We talk about fugitive dust, noise, and lights, and those sorts of things. But what about actual health-related issues?
Well, I mean, me personally, that was the reason that I moved from Dish. My kids would have very frequent nosebleeds. And, kids have nosebleeds. You could say it's biological. Well, I have one adopted child and one biological, one adopted. So we noticed, now the odor at some point would just be horrendously offensive. And literally it would be like eye burning type stuff. And if they don't control the emissions appropriately, that's gonna happen. There's gonna be this facility, it has to be. You have to have this kind of facilities in order to do this activity. So it's going to be in somebody's backyard. And so this odor would get stronger and stronger and stronger. And then we started correlating that when the odors were the worst, my kids would have the worst nosebleeds. And these weren't, kids roughhousing. This would be while they were sleeping. And this would be, both nostrils, very massive nosebleeds where it would look like a murder scene. By the time that we get woken up in the middle of the night with screaming kids, and it would literally look like a murder scene. There would be blood straight down the walls, it'd be all over their hands, And so when we moved, those immediately stopped. And so something there was influencing. And so you can't have cancer-causing products that cause cancer over here and don't cause cancer over here. And what I'm getting at is if all of these chemicals that are produced by oil and gas development cause a problem over here, they're going to cause a problem over here as well. I mean, if you smoke cigarettes, you get exposed to benzene, for example. We've detected benzene. Benzene is a known contaminant of oil and gas development. So to bypass the health impacts at all, I think would be foolish. And again, that's an impact on your property rights, really. I don't really care what you do on your property, just keep your benzene on your side of the fence. And unfortunately, I think we all know now that that's not happening. So health impacts is an issue. So it's not something that should just be bypassed. And a lot of times, like in Texas, a lot of the health, safety, and welfare stuff has been taken away from cities. So you can't regulate a lot of the health, safety, and welfare stuff. That's left to the state. We're preempted by the state. I don't know how it is here. You guys may be able to influence that a lot more than a county commissioner could in Texas. But again, you have to make this a win-win situation, because if you frame this as a win-lose, and the citizens that you represent are the people who are losing, then that's going to cause you some animosity down the road. Good question. Very good question.
On your, in addition to some air monitors, air testing, on that, here it's going to be very difficult, especially where the air, there's a baseline, our agencies really don't test over here for that, so that's going to be really difficult. But you said you set up some test monitors. Could you kind of talk about how you did that and probably what the cost was on one of those monitors?
Yeah, the monitor that's in dish is an auto GC unit, which is a gas chromatograph, and it tests for a battery of chemicals. The base price for that was $250,000, and it cost $100,000 a year to maintain and run. And so the state and the federal government both chipped in to install these, and there's about 16 of them installed in the barn and show. And I wouldn't say that that's the end-all be-all for this, but it certainly helps. But yes, they are very expensive to have something that goes 24/7. But maybe that's something the industry could help pitch in and help purchase if they want to do business with. Maybe, and I don't know that to the extent of your authority, that maybe you want them to do baseline air testing before they ever start work. Maybe you want them to do baseline water testing within 1,000 feet of the hole. Those kind of things are done. I mean, we have a requirement in the ordinance in DISH for them to do baseline air testing before they ever start. They pushed back on that, so we raised our permitting fee enough to cover it. So now they're paying for it whether they want to or not. And you know, we have House Bill 40. I know that you guys have probably heard of House Bill 40, which takes away a lot of the local control. We had one of the strongest ordinances in the state. At the time that we wrote the ordinance, it was the strongest ordinance. Now there's been some bigger setbacks and et cetera. But under the guise of House Bill 40, our ordinance is grandfathered because the industry has done business in strict compliance with the ordinance in DISH. And so we are grandfathered in. So our ordinance stands firm.
Commissioner Elliott, do you have any questions?
No, I don't believe questions in particular. Go back and, I think we've actually covered most of that in our previous discussions. As far as the actual implementation and what we're going to do in the ordinance, we still are waiting for a draft ordinance from our commission.
Yeah.
Once we see that, then we're going to go over it. We'll have some other outside people take a look at it, people that can, hopefully are smarter than us, can tell us what we can and cannot do in regards to what the state will allow us to do. You know, what our authority actually allows us to do. We have some concerns with that.
You know, probably one of the biggest assets that I had in Dish was that we had a very good attorney. And he was very much almost exact on all of his interpretations of what we could and couldn't do. And we took it right to the limit, and he was exactly right. You know, if you go much further than this, you're probably going to get sued and you're going to lose something. You can go to this line. And he was, and so, I don't know, I'm sure you guys have legal assistance in doing that. You know, one thing that you guys might consider is adopting a resolution through your commissioners. You guys call it a commissioner's court here.
Board of Commissioners.
Yeah. You know, opposing any, you know, the state taking away any of your rights to develop an ordinance. I know that there's this bill going through right now that has the forced pooling or forced integration, you know, that sort of stuff that could really impact you guys as well. And so if you agree or disagree with that, then you could do a resolution to support that or to not support that. You know, the pipelines were an issue throughout the state, and these pipeline companies really ran roughshod over local governments. And it was so upsetting that this is one thing where you could get a room full of politicians to agree wholeheartedly that something needs to be done with the pipelines. And so Little Dish started a resolution that said we want more local control over pipelines. And there was 50-some cities that ended up passing this. And Dish started it, Fort Worth adopted it, which is, you know, one of the biggest cities in Texas. South Lake, a lot of these mega cities adopted our little ordinance that we started in Dish, or our resolution. So I would guess that there's a lot of like-minded folks like you guys who want to have more influence over what happens in your, you know, the area that you were elected by the people to serve. So just some ideas.
Can you expand a little bit on that, about the pipeline companies and about what they were doing?
So the pipeline companies in the state of Texas have eminent domain authority. That is, it doesn't have to follow the normal process that you would have to follow if you went and took property, or the city would have to follow. They kind of have their own set of standards and their own set of rules that they follow. And so that was a problem. But another problem is that you couldn't do anything that was considered safety, health, or welfare. You're preempted completely from that. So the only thing you could do is noise ordinances, odor ordinances, some setbacks from streets, some screenings. And so we wanted more control over the routing, because in a town like Dish, if you've got a dozen pipelines, you've got a couple of square miles of property, you know, that pipeline is going to be running through your future commercial district or your future subdivision, and so you have to balance all of those things. And so what we wanted was more influence over the routing of the pipelines coming through cities.
So what was the population of Dish?
Dish is a thriving 200 people. Actually, it's probably more than that now. When I was there, it was 200 people.
200 people?
Yeah.
But you're you're probably built right beside everybody else. So.
Yeah. There's a little bit of an area to expand, but all the small towns are kind of, but there's one area where the town could grow, but it was just a small veteran community. And most of the people commute into either Denton or Fort Worth or Dallas to work.
So you had said there was some things you would have done differently. So if you went through the process, can you tell some of the areas that maybe caught you off guard or blindsided that you would have done differently?
I would have done more work up front. So you guys are in a position that I was never really in because there was already some development that was going on when I got there. And that just continued to expand. So by the time I became elected there was only so much that I could have done. But primarily with the pipelines and the compressor facilities, I would have done a lot more work up front. I would have been a lot more aggressive about trying to get them to do the right thing up front, as opposed to saying, well, I can't regulate the safety, welfare, health and welfare aspects of this. And part of this facility was just outside of our corporate limits. So then it became a question of whether you could actually even enforce the nuisance standards. And so I would have been more aggressive up front prior to them coming in. I would have put up a lot more resistance up front and made them to agree to things before they started construction. And if, they can do things a lot better than they did in Dish and many other places if they're motivated to do that. And if you say, you're welcome here as long as you do it in accordance with this standard, then, make them comply with it. And that's what I would have done differently, is I would have put up a lot more resistance up front and made them do the right thing coming in. Because technically, the city of Dish is still in litigation with many of these companies over some of the property impacts, the devaluation, things like that happened as a result of this activity. And we would have been much better off if we would have put up more resistance from the beginning.
So that's the other question I got, is on your legal stance or legal defense. How did you go about with your legal defense? Did you have the contract law that out and to your attorney and was there that did most of it, or how did that work for you?
We all of our ordinance writing, anything that had to do with the functioning of the town, we did through our in-house legal department, which we didn't have our own lawyer, but we had our own firm that we used. Many of the small towns use the same firm. But for the litigation that was initiated against these companies, we used outside counsel for that in coordination or in conjunction with our counsel. So,
You remember, you referred to your attorney that helped you with your ordinance. Do you remember the name of that fellow?
it's his name is Bryn Meredith.
Bryn Meredith?
Yeah, B-R-Y-N Meredith, and he's with Taylor, Olson, Atkins, Soralla, and Elam. It's T-O-A-S-E is the, if you go to toast.com, I think is the website. Bryn's now a partner in that firm. He is by far the best oil and gas attorney.
You said Toast?
Toast, T-O-A-S-E is the name of the firm. That's the short name.
Okay, yeah.
All of those. But he's probably the best oil and gas attorney that I've seen or heard about. Like I said, he's been pretty spot on those things, and he still, he wrote most of the ordinances in the Barnett Show, and it just so happens he was our city attorney, and as he began to grow in the firm and become a partner and all that stuff, most of those guys move on to the bigger mega cities and that sort of stuff. He's always kept Dish. We've always had a good relationship, and he's always wanted to keep Dish. So he's still the city attorney for Dish.
And what city is that he's in?
He's in Fort Worth. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, how long ago this started in Dish, when they started?
It started in 2004, roughly. Now the literally 15 miles from Dish is where the fracking boom started. That was the first well where they developed this technology. So there was some activity going on prior to this, but in 2004, 2005, I don't know if that energy bill, the infamous 2005 energy bill, had anything to do with it, but it just really ballooned after that. And there was a time period for probably 2 or 3 years where I could look out at a 2-story house, and you could, that little balcony up there, and I could look out and see 5 rigs at all times from my home. There was some were off in the distance, etc. But there was a lot of activity going on, and the pipeline started to come into dish, and the compressor started to be built in 2004, 2005. And it was shortly after that that we started seeing some of the negative impacts.
Sure.
So,
You're talking about compression stations and the different segments of the pipeline. Are they, is there a standard for distances between them? And are there a lot of them in dish? And if so, are they running continually where it's a background noise?
yes, there's a dozen compressor engines in dish. And so initially, when they were installed, none of them had any kind of noise abatement installed around them. And so these things range from about 700 horsepower up to 3,500 horsepower. And so one of the ones that were installed had this building over it that was like your hay barns. They only had partial sides and then the bottom was open, and it was basically a metal building, and it just echoed the noise. It was horrendous. And so these things produce 100 decibels of noise, but through my warm personality, they've all installed some sort of a noise abatement. But they can completely install compressors, and you may be able to make that a part of your ordinance, that you have to completely install soundproof, and they can't raise the ambient noise level by more than 5 decibels, something along those lines. Because they can, and it's not that big of a deal. If they're a good operator, they do it anyway. We drove by one facility yesterday, and it was in,
Off Little Willow, yeah.
yeah, and they had a compressor that was not covered up, it had no kind of noise abatement around it. And during the day, your ambient noise levels are higher because of traffic and things going on, airplanes flying over, etc. At night, it really echoes, especially if you're in a valley or something like that. So the noise impacts is real. And I had a tri-level home, so my home was fairly high in the air, and it would just echo in our upstairs bedroom. And so we had to run some background noise. We had a little fan that we would run or something to kind of drown it out, to try and provide some soft noise. And so you can't have a productive well without having all the infrastructure that it takes to get the product to market. And especially with natural gas, you have to have a pipeline in order to do that. And so there'll be gathering lines that connect to major lines that go to facilities such as the one that we visited yesterday. And right now there's one compressor there, some minor processing equipment, one dehydrator. It's not a huge facility, although if you looked at it, I bet you would think it's a huge facility. Honestly, you would go, holy cow. To me, it's not a big facility because it's nothing compared to what was in dish. But facilities like that will continue to grow. And you have to have some compression on a pipeline every 10, 15 miles. You have to have something to pressurize the gas to keep it moving down the pipeline. And so wherever this gas goes, every 10 or 15 miles, there will have to be some sort of compression. And so they cannot develop in this area without having that infrastructure. It has to be there. So.
Commissioner, further questions?
No.
Just
As far as the transportation of the gases, one other thing that's just kind of hard to understand is the fact that they just can't put it in a truck and truck it out here and try to go by pipeline. So your thoughts on how that works? I mean, they actually have all the gather lines and take to one central facility, and then it can be processed and before it can be put in a truck and hauled. Is that how that works?
In order for it to be hauled, it would have to be liquefied or something like that. So they'll go to, it'll go into the gathering lines. It's separated at the well site. That's the reason you have the tanks that separate the liquid from the gas. The liquids go into the tanks, the gas will go into a gathering line that'll feed into a main line that'll feed into one of these processing facilities. Depending on what happens there, you may separate the propane, the ethane, there's a variety of processes that take place to separate all of that gas out. They remove all the impurities. If it's going into one of the major lines, and I'm not sure about state law here, but certainly if it's an intrastate line, they have to have, or it has to be odorized and it has to be at pipeline grade, which is 94% methane or something to that effect. So depending on what's happening at the facility, you'll see some of these places that'll have like big propane tanks. That's where they're separating all those different compounds out. So there's more to it than just drilling a well, running it through a separator, running it through a dehydrator, and moving it on down the line. And so it depends on I know that you guys, but just by looking at the well sites, there's a lot of tanks. I'm assuming you guys produce a lot of liquids. So that's going to also affect how much processing has to be done to the gas in order to make it pipeline grade or pure methane, if you will. One of the things about Fort Worth, Texas, was for natural gas, that was the sweet spot of the Barnett Shale. That was where they had the most purest methane that required the least amount of processing. The further you got west on the Barnett Shale, the more liquid you got until eventually you got into oil. And so depending on what kind of product you're getting at coal, depending on how much of that processing equipment needs to be. And there's some in the Barnett Shale that are literally hundreds of acres, and they'll have 50 compressor engines, and it looks like a refinery. It looks like something you would see down on the Gulf Coast of Texas. So, and that will have to be somewhere.
Same with your the waste materials on the site, the other tanks for the waste materials that come off and separated out there. That can be also hauled by truck out.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I always, in my formal presentation that I give to the public, I have a picture of aerial view of Dish, and there's literally hundreds and hundreds of well sites, and every day each one of those well sites gets a tanker truck to remove the liquids. And those liquids have to be put somewhere. So some of it can be sold, some of it's called natural gas liquids. It can be used to make chemicals, etc. Another part is waste, and it has to be disposed of in some manner. So you guys will have to be dealing with that as well. In Texas, we have a lot of injection wells, which, to be perfectly honest with you, is probably the underbelly of the entire industry. They are the ones least likely to follow the rules, the least likely to make an effort in following the rules. They're also the ones that are least likely to put up much of a fight if you try and run them out of town too. So they come with their own set of problems. But if you have a site for an injection well, let's say, well, all of these trucks that go to these hundreds of well sites have to go to this one injection well. And so that can cause you some huge traffic problems, can cause you, increase in traffic accidents, etc. So injection wells come with a set of problems all their own as well. And then in the West especially, they do a lot of these misting pits, where they have these pits that they dump the stuff in, and then they mist it. Well, now you're just aerosolizing the chemicals. This isn't salt water, A lot of this stuff would probably run your lawnmower for a little while anyway. So it has enough octane in it to run your lawnmower, and it's going to have enough chemicals in it that your gasolines or diesels will have in it as well. So misting comes with this. There's not a good way to dispose of this stuff. Some may be less impactful than others, but all of them have their own downsides. And one thing that they do in Texas is they call it land farming. And so they will go out and till up a field, and they'll pay the property owner, you know, $1,000 an acre to be able to do this. And so they'll go till up the field, and they'll just dump the waste on the field and then kind of till it up and mix it in. And of course, it's years and years and years before anything will actually ever grow on that. And you can see, I mean, they dump drilling mud, drilling shavings, and things like that, and they just kind of mix it into the soil. In Dish, cities are allowed to not allow that, so we didn't allow that. I'm not sure if you guys have the authority to not allow that or not, but common sense, to me, a lot of times just goes out the window. And like I said in the intro, I didn't come here to tell you what to do or what not to do, but hopefully you'll ask questions that I know you're capable of doing. And question, don't just take what they tell you as being the gospel, because you know, all of the money that they make here is going to come back to the Texas economy. I don't know if the company that is doing business here is from Texas, but most of them are. So, and you'll be left with the mess to clean up.
I think we have just a couple of minutes if we have any further questions.
Commissioners, do you mind if I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So, Calvin, could you just spend just a minute talking about the impacts on to emergency services? You know, the first responders, and you know what they have to be equipped with, the equipment necessary, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Especially like at Dish, we had a volunteer fire department, and it wasn't the Dish volunteer fire department, it was the next town over's volunteer fire department that we contracted with. And you have these relief valves that go off in the middle of the night, shoot millions and millions of MCF of natural gas into the air, and they're basically helpless to be able to do anything about it. You have to wait for the company man to come out and actually shut it off. But dealing with the accidents, especially on site, dealing with the chemicals that they deal with, and I know that they've said that they're not going to be fracking. Even if that would be accurate, you're still going to be dealing with some pretty nasty chemicals. There's pretty nasty chemicals in the drilling mud. And so if you have a fire or an incident on one of these sites, you know, your firemen are going to have the equipment to deal with a chemical fire, and I'm doubtful that you have that now. And you know, you're going to add hundreds of 18-wheelers to your roads that have the road impacts, but you also have the enforcement of your rules, your traffic laws, etc., that you have to think about, because you know they're getting paid to get a job done as quickly as possible, so they may not quite obey with the speed limit, and you know, you see accidents go up. These guys work extremely long hours, so you have fatigue as an issue. I'm pretty sure that since they're considered local, they don't have to follow the same rules that the over-the-road truck drivers have to follow, so they can basically drive around the clock. And so you're going to have those sort of impacts. You also have the impacts of bringing a huge population of transient workers into this area. There's a documentary out called The Overnighters, and it talks about Williston, North Dakota, and all the impacts that they had there. And they didn't have enough housing. The people, especially if you're renting a home or something like that, you're going to be run out of town because you're not going to be able to afford the rent that the homes will, you know, the apartments will bring, etc. And you also bring in people who have a different value system than what you have. So you're going to have the young rig worker who's used to working 12 hours a day and drinking beer the other, you know, every evening, and you know, then you have the normal fisticuffs that comes after a bunch of roughnecks drink beer for a long period of time, and the social impacts, you know, you've got your daughters, you know, your citizens' daughters that have to deal with, you know, this sort of young man coming around. And so there's a lot of social impacts to be thinking about that your police force will have to deal with, your sheriff's department will have to deal with. You know, in Texas, we have very tight laws on sex offenders, and you're probably going to have some of those move into your community. I don't know if that's something that you guys have stringent laws on that they have to report, et cetera. Most states have some sort of reporting requirement whenever you move. Sometimes those apply to transient quarters and sometimes they don't. So if you have an RV park, let's say, in town, you know, you may have that sort of clientele there, and there's no reporting requirements for them to stay there because they're just there temporary. You know, and a lot of times these guys work 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So they may come up here and work for 2 weeks and then head back to Texas for 2 weeks. And, you know, they may have a family here and a family there. So not every person who works in the oil and gas industry is that, but there is that aspect of it that you can't ignore as officials.
I have 9:59, so we pretty much burnt our 1 hour, so
I really appreciate you guys
Thank you, guys.
Thank
taking
you.
the time to do
appreciate the
this.
information.
And so,
And I just wanted to confirm again, that gentleman's name was Bryn Meredith
Bryn Meredith.
with Toast Law Firm, TOASE,
Yes.
out of Fort Worth.
Yeah, perfect. And I've spoken in other places, and they have used him to help them with their ordinance writing and stuff like that, and even places well outside of Bush. So he could probably consult you guys up here in-house.
Thank you. It's been a very good discussion. Thank you for the information you've done.
I know you're a councilman in Aubrey.
In Aubrey.
Yeah.
Aubrey's a little bit bigger. It's a little different than Dish. You know, in Dish, we had everything was basically contracted out. We contracted with the sheriff's department to provide our police protection. We contracted with the fire department to provide that. Most everybody was contracted out. Whereas now, we have everything in-house. We have our own police department, our own fire department, our own water and sewer, our own public works. So it's a little bit different. You know, it's a little bit more of the bureaucracy that you have to deal with and stuff. But it's a good learning experience. It's always fun. So.
An adventure.
Yep, that's for sure.
Good luck tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
You betcha.